To become a video game worthy of multiple game awards, where your actors, your music, your overall gameplay were considered some of the best, you have to create something special, either reinventing an already pre-established concept or creating a story that is so intriguing and gritty that it sticks with your players for years to come, or possibly creating something completely new that people didn't realize that they would love. But what if a game accomplished all three? What if there was a game that enhanced an already pre-established concept, crafting it into something completely fresh? What if that very same game had an intriguing story that left players feeling enraged, depressed, and joy, all at the same time? What if this very same game established a whole new genre of video game that inspired many others to follow in its footsteps, to become something just as, if not better, than the inspiration? In 2013, Telltale Games gave us this game. They gave us the first season of The Walking Dead, a game that branched out into a term called Walking Dead-like, which were stories that had different paths to take depending on the choices you, the player, made, making it feel like you are not just experiencing a story, but you are rather part of it. Without The Walking Dead, we don't have Detroit Become Human, or Life is Strange, or Until Dawn. The Walking Dead was nothing short from incredible. The first season is still viewed under a positive light and instills beautiful memories of storytelling, gameplay, and most importantly, the characters. Just from understanding one of the biggest and most important decisions players have to make at the very beginning of the game, we are able to understand exactly the weight that our actions carry in the story. While faced with the choice of either saving Carly or Doug, the player is given a small window of time to make a split-second decision that will end with one person living and another person being brutally killed. No matter which decision you make, you have to live with it, and there is nothing you can do to change the outcome. Decisions like this follow you throughout the entirety of the series, and these choices are what shape the people around you, along with yourself. No matter how much you care about the people you try to save, the outcome may not be what you expected, and either way you will never be able to escape the sense of doubt that plagues you as you move forward, whether you made the correct choice or whether you did all you could to save someone's life. Surrounding the big choices that you remember the most when looking back on these stories, there are countless smaller decisions that serve as basic gameplay elements. Choosing who to side with in an argument, deciding whether or not to talk about a topic in front of children, or choosing who gets to eat and who gets to starve. By making these decisions, you are telling the game exactly what type of person you want the main protagonist to be. Whether it be Lee, Javi, or Clementine, you are the person who makes them into who they are. Whether it be an absolute jerk or a role model, everything is in the player's hands. The game does an amazing job of putting you in the apocalypse. The game makes it very clear from the very beginning that this game series adapts to the choices you make. The story is tailored to how you play, meaning that you make decisions from asking a little girl how her first day at school was, to deciding whether or not to smash a man's head in with your best friend inside of a meat locker in front of that man's daughter. The series is a 4-game long story that follows different characters, some we knew from the games before and some completely new ones. While all 4 of the games vary in quality, I believe that in comparison to the rest, the gap in quality is nowhere easier to understand than when you see the difference between the first season and the second. In the first game, you are able to understand when you are making a big choice that will be reflected in the rest of the story. Choosing between saving Carly or Doug, either letting go or pulling up a teenage boy who wants to die, or cutting off your own arm in hopes it will prolong your life. All of these decisions had consequences, and the player weighed these out in their head in the short amount of time they had before selecting a choice. But in comparison to the second game, the developers never spell out the importance of your decisions. Sometimes someone you save is immediately killed 30 minutes later, or an act of bravery ends up being overridden by another character no matter what you choose. Or sometimes, choosing to help your own friend ends up getting a crippled man murdered. Nothing in this game felt concrete. You never knew when your choices mattered, and while it might be realistic, it did not capture the same scope of the first season. Besides a few extremely major decisions, namely the final one you make in the season. The first season of The Walking Dead can be summed up as completely based around the relationship you as the player craft between protagonist Lee Everett and the little girl he protects with his life, Clementine. While there are other characters that you grow attachments to, nothing is as important to the player than being a role model for Clem and protecting her in any way possible. While tensions get higher, the player may ask why they even bother to be a part of this makeshift community of broken people. But that question answers itself whenever you look back and see Clementine by her side. A kid needs people to protect them, people to teach them, and your group has parents, other kids, and people with incentive to protect this little girl. No matter how dysfunctional, the player cannot leave these people without putting Clem in danger. Clementine serves as an anchor to the player. You can play as one of the most horrible human beings out there, and that's who Clementine will become. In a seemingly hilarious scene, if you choose to curse in front of Clem, she believes it's okay, causing her to swear in front of another child and his mother. Despite the comedy accompanying the dialogue, it teaches the player that whatever it is they do will change Clementine. As you play through the first season, the question of, how will this change Clem, plagues your brain, rent-free. The game uses Clementine as an asset to make your choices matter. No matter how you slice it, your decisions will change her. Will they scar her, make her despise you, or preserve her childlike nature? The player is tasked to weigh out these options even if it means going against your favorite characters. Similar to Ellie from The Last of Us, Clementine also serves as the player's chance to proving themselves to be a good person, and their hope drives them throughout the entirety of the game. Now, what makes Season 2 different from the first? While now instead of being the father figure of a little girl, you are that little girl. 2 years older, but she has experienced a lifetime's worth of suffering and pain. After finding another group that mirrors the first one's theme of providing protection for Clementine, the game doesn't really capture the same purpose that the first one did. Why exactly is Clementine making these choices, and why do they matter? Are they teaching her lessons that will aid her in the future? Or are they representation of Lee's mentality on Clementine's actions? It isn't until we see a familiar face that this question of purpose is finally answered. After finding out that the character we all believed was dead in the first game is alive and well, his relationship with Clementine is the new Lee and Clem. While wildly different from the relationship we crafted before, this new one still has elements that reminded us of those good times, but this time, we are in the daughter's shoes. By the nature of this game, my Kenny is not going to be the same as yours, but they both started from the same place. Kenny at the beginning of our relationship with him was nothing more than another example of what someone could become in the face of the apocalypse. In this case, Kenny was a man that devoted everything to his family, and how we sympathized or attacked him would be our way of displaying our agreement or disapproval of his philosophy. His devotion to his family was so utterly unshakable that the big decision we made after meeting him, the choice between saving his son or Herschel's son, Kenny obviously chooses his own blood, but Kenny takes it a step further when he grabs his son, and once he is no longer in danger, abandons Sean and leaves him to die, whether or not Lee agrees with his choice. Kenny in and of himself is a flawed character, someone you would deem an absolute coward. Despite his unwavering philosophy to keep his family safe no matter what, Kenny would only talk a big game when he had someone backing him up. He could only argue about the greater good when there was a wall separating him from danger. But when the threat of Sean's life was in his face, Kenny couldn't do the right thing. Kenny was unable to keep his back straight and save the son of another man, despite his devotion to the concept of family. No matter how you slice it, no matter how you look at it, Kenny only had one thing on his mind: I need to keep my family alive. No matter what, he didn't give a crap if even Clementine died, if it meant his wife would. Or he would sacrifice a suffering girl's life if it meant buying himself some time to scavenge more food for his family. But let me ask you a question. What happens when you take a man's only philosophy and rip it away from him? In the middle of Season 1, Kenny's wife shoots herself in the head, and his only son is slowly turning into a walker. In my story, I chose to be the one to put the child down, as it seemed Kenny was unable to do it himself. After putting countless lives on the line to save his family, Kenny was unable to do the one thing he set out to do. He could not keep them alive. Suddenly, Kenny morphs from a man with undying devotion to his family into an empty husk of a man that Lee could become, if he ever failed to keep his promise of keeping Clem safe. After becoming this new man, Kenny starts a journey to prove himself. He becomes a man that Lee was for most, a man that cares for others. In the ending most of us got, Kenny is presumed dead after sacrificing himself for someone else. Whether it be Krista or Ben, Kenny finally does something for another person that didn't openly benefit him or his family. This can be most easily seen in Kenny's ending with Ben. Ben was a character that directly caused the death of Kenny's entire family, and as a result the death of Kenny's entire philosophy that made him who he was. Despite swearing Ben would be killed by his very own hands, Kenny keeps his promise in an unexpected way. Ben falls off a balcony and is impaled by some laying rebarb, straight through his abdomen with nothing but one bullet. Kenny pushes Lee out of the alleyway. and sacrifices himself making sure Ben will not suffer and become a monster, leading to what we thought was Kenny's end. Kenny's death scene was Kenny doing what he couldn't do for his son. The final time Kenny was given the choice whether or not to run away, and for the first time, he didn't. Kenny forgave Ben at the very end, and he killed him as if he was his own family, openly displaying the change in his philosophy. Then out of nowhere, Kenny is just alive, causing the entire ending of his story arc to be flipped on its head. His beautiful story, that had left me speechless and in tears, was replaced with the very same man, but this time, with an overgrown beard. Despite the fact Kenny doesn't have a strong relationship with Clementine, seeing a familiar face in this lonely, broken world fills the player with nothing but joy. A joy that is accurately portrayed in Clem if you press the Hug Kenny button. And honestly, if you didn't, I have no idea who you are. Clementine's reaction to Kenny's presence is not really hers, but rather the player's, because we are the person with the connection with Kenny, not Clementine. Despite this, we as players cannot help but embrace that prior attachment to him. As a mirror to Lee, Kenny fills the void Lee left in us. Lee was someone we loved and cherished, and experienced some of the worst experiences with ever, and now he's gone. Kenny, a character that serves as a possible outcome for Lee, a character that we suffered the same experiences with, was now given to us to replace him. Kenny seems to answer the question, who is going to fill the void Lee left in Clem? Who is going to take care of her now and show her the way? As we learn from Kenny's new group, Kenny walked away from Season 1 by packing all of his trauma into the back of his head and never looking at it again. But it isn't until Clementine shows up that the very same trauma he worked so hard to hide is now resurfacing. In the first game, after the death of his family, Kenny becomes an aggressive man with a quick temper, which is immediately resurfaced as soon as Clementine is reunited with him. He snaps quickly at people who question his words, and even speaks to Clementine harshly in certain scenarios. It is clear, Clementine, while providing comfort for Kenny, she also brings out the worst in him. The first 2 episodes of Season 2 can be summed up simply as Clementine's new group of traumatized people running away from a man named Carver, a man that resembles communist dictators from history. As we are reunited with Kenny, Carver attacks the group and captures them, putting them into this community that forces them to be laborers in exchange for their safety. Not a bad deal until you realize Carver is the type of person to murder someone because a girl failed to pick blueberries right. After pushing for an escape, Kenny and the rest of the group agrees on a plan for Clementine to steal some walkie-talkies, to be able to have info on the guards. Once Carver finds out, and Kenny takes the blame for it, one of the hardest scenes to watch plays.
3. Fucker.
No!
God! Jesus Christ! Stop!
Stop him! Somebody stop him!
Troy, do
Let
something!
me go!
Stop! Clementine! Help
You
me!
don't have to do this, Bill!
No! Stop it! Kenny! Kenny!
Little shit.
Bill! That's enough, Bill! Please! Bill, there's a breach!
Carver beat the ever-living shit out of Kenny. Eventually, once the escape actually happens, Carver is shot in both of his legs and the characters have to decide exactly what to do with him. Despite many of them suggesting they leave the dictator to be eaten by walkers, Kenny decides to take matters into his own hands, and beats Carver's face in with a crowbar beyond recognition. After unleashing his anger, Kenny follows the rest of the group into a herd of walkers to escape the community. Upon losing another person close to him, Kenny loses his shit. He is unable to contain the trauma and pain he had been bottling up since the first game. He lashes out at people, and even yells at the one person who still cares about him, Clementine. Clementine is the only person he has left now, the only person who he has an obligation to take care of, because she is his only family. No one in the group trusts him, and nobody else takes his aggressive behavior as well as Clem. Clementine is Kenny's only hope left in the world until Rebecca, one of the group's survivors, has her baby Alvin Jr. Kenny, being the family man, falls in love with him and sees AJ as new hope for his philosophy. One event leads to another, and many people are killed, eventually leading Kenny to taking a kid named Arvo prisoner, so they can use him for resources. Kenny's treatment of Arvo is seemingly a mirror to his treatment of Ben in the first game, except this time, Kenny isn't afraid to get his hands dirty. Upon reaching the house where Arvo promises supplies, Kenny beats the shit out of the kid because he didn't see the supplies promised immediately.
Bet those magical supplies are bullshit too. What? No speaking of English?
Fuck you.
You fucking commie piece of shit!
Kenny! Fuck you.
You mother! Fuck the fuck, Kenny! Shit!
Let him go, Mike.
Get the fuck off of me!
At this point in the story, the other supporting characters aren't angry at Kenny for his behavior, but rather scared of him. They devise a plan to leave Clementine and him behind, but one event leads to another, and before we know it, Clementine gets shot in the shoulder and wakes up to the sound of Kenny and a woman named Jane yelling at each other. With only 2 other people in Clem's life minus the newborn baby, Clementine tries her best to de-escalate the situation between Kenny and Jane, as it spirals out of control, and we are faced with the scene where Kenny is about to murder Jane with a knife, and Clementine has to decide to shoot her new father figure, or let him continue to be a monster.
Baby killer!
God damn it!
I'll fucking kill you!
I knew you would.
This is not the same choice we are given at the end of Season 1. We were given the choice of whether or not to shoot the man we love so much out of fear of the final memory of him becoming a monster. But this time, we have to decide whether or not to kill the man we love so much to prevent him from continuing to be a monster. This game is not like the first one. The first one was a game about choices that changed the lives of many. A game about a relationship between a sweet innocent girl and a loving caretaker. But this new one is a game about a relationship between that same girl, who has now lost all her innocence, and a broken, traumatized, spiteful man that wants to preserve her as his last family member so badly that he is blinded from making the right choices. This isn't the same relationship as Lee and Clem. Throughout the first game, Lee was the person taking care of Clementine, and it wasn't until the final scene where Lee teaches Clem how to take care of other people. In this game, Clementine takes care of Kenny. While Kenny is the adult that is there when she needs it, Clementine is seen as not as an 11-year-old girl, but rather a daughter that has grown to understand she has to be the adult in the relationship more often than not. The reason choices in this game do not carry the same amount of weight as the first is because of Kenny. Rather than seeing how these choices affect the plot and answer the question, how will this change Clementine, you are answering the question, how will this change Kenny? Which highlights exactly what Kenny is. Yes, he is someone she truly cares about and loves and cherishes, but at the end of the day he is a threat to the people around him, a bomb just waiting to go off. This brings me to my opinion on this game. This game is not lower quality than the first. It is an accurate representation of what it means to be a child in this world. In the first scene of the game, Clementine gets one of the people she cares about killed, this being Omid. Unlike the first game, Clementine is directly responsible for the death of her friend, and this blame no longer falls on Lee. The reason why this game's choices feel like they lead to outcomes you can't control is because Clementine, as a child, cannot recognize the difference between something that is in her control and when it isn't. Clementine cannot realize when her actions may result in someone's death, and she cannot recognize when the hope she has that she can save someone is not hope, but rather ignorance. The second game in the franchise is not a story about finding a replacement for Lee, but rather becoming Lee ourselves. A story that teaches Clem how to make all the tough decisions that he had to in the first game. Because despite all the tragedy, it is something Clementine has to learn if she wants to be the person Lee believes she could be. But back to Kenny. This game has many different endings, and the game nudges us towards what they deem to be good endings, which is either shooting him or leaving him for good. The reason why these are good endings is because Kenny finally realizes what he was, a monster, where even the person he loved the most, and the person who cared about him the most, cannot stand but leave him. But if you're like me, I stayed with Kenny. I walked away with him at the end of the game and chose to be with him no matter how horrible he was. Because I cannot deny how much I sympathize with his love for Clementine. Kenny's character arc from the first game was utterly destroyed with his inclusion in the second, and it was rather morphed into a whole new monster of what exactly Lee did not become. A man who loves someone so much that he might get them killed for it. A man who tricked the player base into becoming so loyal to him that countless people, including myself, ventured off with him into the wilderness. A man who lost sight of his philosophy despite claiming he had it all under control. The Walking Dead Season 2 is not a bad game. It is a game with a complex narrative that understands what it is trying to be. A game without hope, a game without empathy, and a game that understands just how emotionally taxing it will be to play through it. A game that aims to answer the question of who will be Clementine's new Lee? And we all know that answer better than ever before. It's Clementine.
There's thunder